Hello, everyone, and thank you very much indeed for signing up, taking the time out of valuable days, valuable time to listen to myself, Anthony Haynes, registered nutritional therapist and head of technical services at Nutri-Link. Delighted to be speaking with my friend and colleague, Laura Sterling, registered nutritional therapist who's working with Regeneris Laboratories. Today is a unique day, a number of different ways. First of all, it's not often that I get to talk about stool testing on a webinar. It's a pleasure to do so. And also we have a collaborative, we have a joint collaboration webinar. Laura's in one place, I'm in another. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out, and hello, Laura.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks for having me. It's going to be a real pleasure, this. I'm excited. So thank you very much. Fantastic.
So what we've got is this. So if you bear with us, everyone. So I hope you're getting your audio and your slides sorted out. What I'm going to do is we're going to be switching from one screen to the other. So in fact, Laura's going to be presenting her slides now. So welcome to the GI360 stool test. And what I'd like to do is Laura's now presenting and she's going to share her screen. And do we have that there? Fantastic, Laura, and let's get that screen up. So I'm excited about this new stool test. It's called GI360. I definitely have some questions. I've been engaged in actually engaging in stool testing with the original first laboratories in the 1990s, and I conducted hundreds and hundreds of stool tests for clients. What I'd like to do is ask you some really key questions. And then we started with the first slide on PCR, multiplex PCR for GI pathogens. So really, I'd like to ask you, what is different, Laura, about the GI360 profile that our attendees can glean information from?
So Doctors Data have spent 2 years bringing this product to market. So, and the real strength of it is that it combines the old technology with the new technology. So as you're probably aware, there's been a huge explosion in technology and understanding the microbiome, or maybe not even understanding the microbiome, but beginning to delve into the depth and complexity of the microbiome. And there are some companies that have brought products to market, and they've all been very exciting and innovative. But what's been fabulous about this test is that Doctors Data have introduced, firstly, an FDA-cleared multiplex PCR panel, which you're seeing on your screen now, for the pathogens, and also a CE marked dysbiosis or microbiome assessment for the commensal side of the bacteria, for the diversity and abundance of the general microbiome. So not including pathogens in that one, just the health of the microbiome.
That's quite dense. The last couple of sentences were actually quite dense of information, so thank you for that. So the FDA cleared, so that's basically an American approval process. So effectively it's been sort of scientifically validated and supported in the USA. And am I right in saying the CE mark is the same effectively as the FDA approved in Europe?
Indeed. So they've taken this this dysbiosis index and the diversity and abundance from the commensal flora from a European cohort based out of a Norwegian company, and they've published over 20 different papers relative to IBS and IBD and FODMAP diet and all sorts of fascinating areas to look at changes within the microbiome. And to my knowledge, it's the only one that's CE marked, so it's reproducible and validated for use in assessing the complexity of the microbiome.
Right. I think that's a hugely important thing to just to reconfirm back to you is for us as practitioners having absolute faith and trust in actually what information we're seeing in the test result.
I agree, and I think, as I said, there's been such an explosion in technology, and nobody really knew, or nobody really knows what they're looking at. And what Doctors Data didn't want to miss was the potential for the pathogens as well. So apart from having the PCR pathogens that you have here, they will also be doing cultures for bacteria and yeast for any additional bacteria that may be there, alongside microscopy for the parasites from the old-fashioned looking down a microscope and seeing what's there. So they're really kind of
the new with the old.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. That's what's exciting.
Yeah, and what's fascinating as well, just a little bit on PCR, if I may, just to sort of interject, it's really in honor of the individual who discovered PCR. It was just a coincidence that I happened to have read and heard an obituary program. So God rest his soul, Carey Mullis died on the 7th of August this year. He was 74 years old, died of pneumonia in his home in America. But he was the man who discovered, basically invented PCR, and it's interesting. He's quite a controversial character, and I'm just paying homage to him with a little bit of information about him. So Carey, K-A-R-Y, Mullis, not Mullins, but Mullis. He was working for a company called Cetus Corporation in California, and he was driving this Honda Civic apparently in Highway 128 from San Francisco. So the story goes, and it's been documented, and I've looked it up. So Honda Civic on his on Highway 128, and it came to him, and he's been known to experiment with LSD and with other drugs. So he's a controversial character. He's actually a larger than life character. He had quite an eventful life, but he envisaged this in 1983. It then took a long time. Effectively, it took 10 years to sort of perfect or sort of expand on the process of PCR. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993, 10 years after he envisaged it and invented it. And so that was a huge honor for him, and really so puts him in his stake in history effectively. And Cetus Corporation paid him a $10,000 bonus, which I guess in the 1980s would have been a bit more than now. And what's fascinating is that they then sold the patent for PCR to Hoffman La Roche for a sum of money which is a little bit more than $10,000. It was $300 million.
No.
So, and PCR is now used in obviously in forensics and the testing we've got. So it's got a wide, diverse capacity. And I think it's just sort of recognition of Carey Mullis, but also the notion that this PCR testing is certainly and really innovative and very accurate and fantastic science to be incorporating that we're using in functional assessments. So it's great. Just thank you for listening. I thought I'd share that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. I didn't know all of that, so thank you for sharing that with me as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think what's so great about it is it's so sensitive. So it will pick up pathogens, and it's going to be fascinating as these results start coming out to see how sensitive it is.
Yes.
And definitely in the past, there have been companies that have been shot down for producing results that are too sensitive. So I think the FDA clearance for this, the validation of it, gives it a very robust clinical use as well, which I like. And then, as I said, they don't want to miss out on any bacteria, so they will also be using the MALDI-TOF technology that we have become familiar with for identifying bacteria that they culture. So as you can see here, you should get a PCR for Salmonella on the left-hand side, and then if it's present and culturable, it will also be cultured, as you'll see on the right-hand side.
Do you need to have, I've got a question immediately on this, and maybe you do or do not know the answer, but so if salmonella comes up on the PCR, am I saying it doesn't automatically have to come up on the microbiology?
Yeah.
But if it does, you've got a problem. If it doesn't, what then? Is that a good question to ask?
Yeah, I think, well, that's what's going to be interesting. I've certainly reviewed a couple of these. For example, Campylobacter came up on the PCR, but it didn't come up in the culture. And the person had an acute, a very, very acute, he had terrible GI symptoms and then had a much worsening weekend of symptoms. And that's when he chose to submit his sample shortly after that. So it's possible that as part of his complex history, he'd had Campylobacter food poisoning essentially over the weekend, and then done his sample when he was feeling a little bit better away from that infection. So the PCR picked up the Campylobacter, but the culture wasn't there because he wasn't taking the samples at the acute phase of his infection. It was already all quite muddy water already because he has in a sense, a form of inflammatory bowel disease. So it's interesting. The practitioner and I was saying, this is early days for me. I don't know how sensitive this is going to be, but the fact that it has got the verification and the backing from the government for me, and it's so the reason that it is different from other labs that are running this where I believe they're not using an FDA cleared setup,
Right.
is that they are quantifying the presence of the bacteria, whereas this is actually just a positive or negative, and that's what it's been approved for use of. So
right.
I think what I would say with a stool test is always, and I spend my life saying this in all my presentations, is treat the patient and not the result. So if we find that the PCR is super, super sensitive and the patient is not exhibiting any signs of salmonella, then I would not obviously treat, in inverted commas, for salmonella. I would say it may be something that they've been exposed to, but because of their diversity and health and robustness of their microbiome, they were not susceptible to the infection of salmonella, but they have recently been exposed to it.
I think that's a brilliant description. I also wholeheartedly agree. Always, 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 inverted commas, treat the patient. Many clients ask me, "Oh, do you treat this? Do you treat that?" And I said, "Well, actually, no. I support the individual in front of me who might have X, Y, or Z condition." So I completely support that 100%. And tests, certainly these tests and certain stool tests that have been available, I know that people are treating test results, and I've seen that, and I certainly would criticise that. It's not the ideal way to go. How many? Tell me, I'm really intrigued. This Morditov, which is I remember attending a fantastic lecture from Dr. David Quigg, who's the PhD lab director at Doctors Data, introducing the Morditov. It's the matrix-assisted laser deiodinization time of flight through a tandem mass spectrometry. And I understand that it costs about $250,000 at least for the mass spec kit. And I understand there's actually, well, maybe you can tell me how many bacteria are assessed for with the mass spec tech. I mean, how many can they assess for? Do you know?
So commercially, from Doctors Data, they have a library of 1,400 bacteria and yeast, which is the largest one that's being used in a commercial setting. So it's the technology that went to Mars to find life on Mars, and essentially the way I feel like it's finding the fingerprint of the bacteria. So it does rely on the culture technology still. So they will grow, as you're probably aware, in little petri dishes. Any bacteria or yeast that they are able to culture from the stool will then be put through this fingerprint technology, let's call it. It's a bit more catchy than the Morditov. And they'll identify it based on that specific fingerprint. So it's Doctors Data themselves have identified 2 new bacteria in America that have been written up and published now because they were using this technology, which had they not had it available to them, that bacteria would have been missed.
Oh wow. Okay, so they've actually these are 2 whole new bacteria not previously described that have been found via Doctors Data. So they're sort of in the lexicon of bacteria.
And then they send them to the FDA and they say, I'm not entirely sure, or the CDC, Center for Disease Control. They're like, we think we've got this bacteria. Can you check this? And then they confirmed it. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's nice to be at the head of something, the vanguard, pioneering some sort of technology. For me, it's all about treating the client absolutely and actually having test results which give a true reflection. But you've got to fold these test results, as far as I can see, into the context and the case history of the client.
Absolutely. That's the kind of critical bit. So what's also, this is the microbiome assessment. So from again, what's interesting about this is it's not necessarily pinpointing one particular bacteria and blaming all of your symptoms on that one particular bacteria, but reading this setup of 40-ish bacteria as one marker. And then identifying from this spidergram that they give you on the sample report, on the front page of the report. This is what they're classifying as normobiosis. So the white shaded area on your screen is a nice, healthy, balanced microbiome. And then as we see imbalances in different phyla, the spidergram will pull towards the imbalanced bacteria. If it goes in, there's a deficiency of that bacteria, and if it's pulling towards the red on the outside, there's an excess of that phyla.
And so it's the inner white sort of hexagonal shape, which was symmetrical on the first slide, and then it's slightly more diamond shaped and pointy on the next one. I see. Yes.
and then based on the balance of all of those bacteria, they can give you a dysbiosis index if you're an adult. They can't do it for children under, or anyone under the age of 18, because the reference ranges were established on an adult population.
Right.
So then you'll have this dysbiosis index of 1 to 5 relative to your abundance of your and diversity of your bacteria.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. I've seen previous scores where it's been less three-dimensional. It's less of a spidergram, more of a 1 versus 1. The Firmicutides versus the Bacteroidetes is what I've seen the ratio of before. So that's more dynamic. And I like the term normobiosis, which is, I think maybe you've have seen that before. Normobiosis is am I right? That's the healthy balance, and the opposite of that would be more dysbiosis. So it's actually the healthy aspect of dysbiosis.
Yeah, exactly. And based on the commensal bacteria only, so what it's not doing is taking into consideration the additional actually dysbiotic pathogenic bacteria, which is also, from my point of view, really interesting. So if you had a culture of Salmonella, for example, that's not taken into consideration on the commensal dysbiosis score.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, so it's the sixth phyla, effectively. Is you've got the actinobacteria, and then you've got that sort of verruco microbiota there, and gosh, we learn new terms. Is it Tenoricutes as well as the proteobacteria? So yeah, so it's actually more dynamically reflective of the whole terrain of the bacteria in the gut, rather than just being skewed by one pathobiont.
Exactly. And then because they are, so I think, and I think you're going to agree with me, I think we as clinicians have a responsibility to not be overusing any kind of antimicrobial agent, be that an antibiotic or a natural antibacterial agent for bacteria or yeast. And so because they are using the culture technology for the additional bacteria and yeast, they are then able to provide us with the bacterial susceptibilities. So what you're seeing on your screen now is a list of products that might be worth considering for, in this case, Morganella morgani.
Right.
And likewise, you would have that for yeast. So I think from in my clinical practice, I know there are wonderful products from your stable that that I think we should be able to talk about, if that's okay, because this is the
look at those for sure.
Yeah.
And so susceptibilities, and again, so in terms of the presentation, if I sort of stand back a moment and look at presentation, when I first looked at these complicated stool tests and then looked at organic acid tests, you look at it, it's the first one you get, it's like, oh, okay, I need an 8-hour lesson on how to interpret it. But actually, the presentation is actually it's not quite traffic light, but it's like that. But it's very easy to see effectively where they're at. And I like the fact that the high susceptibility, it's not just high, medium, or low. It actually gives you a degree within those different frameworks, which you can tell from the pyramid, little triangles, green triangles and blue triangles on that.
Yeah.
For me, just helpful. So we can see in this instance, we've got grapefruit seed extract, uva SC and silver, and oregano is less sensitive to the Morganella is less sensitive to the oregano. But interestingly, it's more.
So this is for this particular person's growth of Morganella. So they might have used oregano previously and created some form of antibiotic resistance to oregano, but they still have susceptibility for those other products. And then similarly, they will do the same for the yeast susceptibilities as well.
Just as you mentioned it, my understanding is that the likelihood of antibiotic resistance to natural agents is much less likely than to pharmacological agents, in my understanding.
Oh, right, great.
Yeah, so I'm aware of that. I haven't got a paper to refer to that, but I'm aware that's the case. And maybe it's because of the fact that they're natural, they're not, and they've like concentrated extracts, yes, but they're not pharmacological agents to which there may be some sort of resistance. I have some clients who've taken, for example, the oregano extract, which I'll come and talk about in a moment. It's actually, she said it, not me, and it's a light-hearted statement, but actually she meant it quite seriously. She said, this product has saved my life. I mean, it's this individual has multiple autoimmune conditions and celiac, and she's taken the oregano extract, the ADP oregano I'll talk about, and she's taken a relatively high dose for a relatively small lady for going on 5 years, and it's the one thing that actually fundamentally allows her to exist in a way that she knows. So it's interesting. So I wouldn't recommend that across the board at all, but I'm just showing it as an example. I've got another client who's taken it for 2 years, and as indispensable. I mean, it had improvement, and it's not because you create a dependency. By stopping it, the symptoms worsen, and we've done stool tests. She's had gastroscopes, been to see a gastroenterologist. She's retaken it, and it's really had a tremendous benefit again. So the same dose. So there's not an increased tolerance to the effect of it, nor is there a dependence on it. But it's something that seems to, I suppose I refer to as something that reaches the part that other beers can't reach, if you like, in terms of that Heineken advert. But it's what's interesting with oregano extract is it also is anti-inflammatory. I'll show you the bottle in a moment. We'll switch screens for the viewers. And
Yes.
I have got so just to sort of my sort of summary view. There are other markers too. So I think let's just finish. Maybe finish. We'll maybe nip back and forth. But there are other markers there's chemistry as well as microbiology involved in these tests with a few of the markers. I'd love to go through just the rest of it, just to give the viewers a sort of sense of the whole. And is that page 31 on the bottom? Is that 3.1? Is that?
No, it's just my jumbled slides, I think.
No, I'm just curious to know how many pages.
It is quite a long report, but it's not 31 pages.
You know, I've got a test result myself, and I might actually flip back to that. I've got that on my screen as well, and we'll look at that. But these chemistry markers can be hugely useful. And I find sometimes that the client may have nothing imbalanced within the bacteria or the yeast, or indeed the parasites, but actually these markers show up more what's going on. So tell us more about the top ones, the digestion, absorption.
So I think these will be the markers that people will probably be more familiar with, because they haven't changed anything with this from a doctor's data point of view.
Right.
So pancreatic elastase is one of my favorite markers from a digestive wellness point of view. The reference range goes up to greater than 500. Now, annoyingly, the only studies are done when it drops down below 200. But in my clinical experience, I think if you support anyone if they're around between 200 and 400, that they generally do really well. So
I agree. I'm agreeing with you on this completely. We haven't had this is not a pre-recorded conversation, but we haven't prompted on this one. But I have to say I completely agree. I find the elastase, certainly in inverted commas, higher but really the higher the better. Certainly above. Yeah. Although the reference interval on the right-hand side of the screen is above 200, but importantly, they give the result on the left, which is 270 in this case. But you can see from the green marker that it's not high, and I certainly would want the individual to be over 450 to 500 over that to reflect appropriate pancreatic enzyme issues, which I find are extremely common as an issue.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a degree of people need to work harder on their chewing and all those sorts of things as well. But the people generally do very well on digestive support if their elastase is showing to be dropping in stool, even though you can't find actual papers saying that there's any kind of pathology there. No. Annoyingly, I have tried desperately to find those.
I suppose that's the nature of functional testing, is we're appreciating there's pathology range and there's a functional range. So we're sharing with this audience, well, and again, thank you so much for tuning in to finding out more about this great test, but also reviewing something that we've already got available in other stool tests. Is the elastase marker, very, very important for me, and having above 500 would be ideal. And I very often recommended digestive support and had positive outcomes when the level's been lowish in the range, but not abnormal in the test result per se.
Agreed. And then similarly for the fat stain, so there are some people that naturally start sort of swerving away from foods that contain fat because they feel uncomfortable or heavy after eating it potentially, or they might have digestive upset. So if they're not eating fat when they do this test, then you wouldn't expect fat to appear in their stool. So again, understanding what's going on in the patient in the run up to them doing the test. But I find if the fat stain is at few or like within the reference range, but allegedly, but so not above the reference range, I still find that they would benefit from some additional lipase support or fat support or bile support maybe as well.
Yes, I agree completely on that one. Right, so we're still talking about, although the PCR is really giving us a greater sensitivity for the bacteria, microbes, and indeed viruses. Maybe you should mention that as well. and parasites, but it's but also looking at the digestive function, which I find is so commonly imbalanced. And if we just consider for a moment that the sort of 21st century living, there are so many people who spend most of their life on the sympathetic on state. I know it's obvious, but just sort of giving the wording for that. And many people's breathing is not appropriate, so we're shallow breathing, and it's sort of on the whole time, and that's not conducive to the digestive system working properly. So and you can get a really good reflection of that. At least you can be pointed to it by these markers.
Agreed. And then from an inflammatory point of view, my favorite marker there is calprotectin, the one that is not circled. But calprotectin is a super sensitive marker for digestion in the bowel. And there be varying degrees of concern depending on how high that level goes. But that's a nice robust marker that is very much run on the NHS now also. And then secretory IgA gives you a really good idea of what's going on in light of things like stress or dysbiosis, of what sort of immune defenses you've got going on in the gut. So for that to have a lower reference range and be below the reference range is almost as much, or if not more, of a concern than it is if you have an elevated secretory IgA, because you haven't got any of those immune defenses in your gut. And then last, sorry.
I'm sorry, no, we're not in the same room, obviously, but so I think it's great you look at the lactoferrin and lysozyme, which actually distinguishes between the inflammatory bowel and the IBS, I understand. And calprotectin, which actually uses a marker for, as a blood test for calprotectin as well, was a marker for RA now as well. So it's
I did not know that. That's fascinating.
I presented the information in a webinar a few months ago for Nutri-Link, but that's so it's very interesting. You can do blood tests and as well as stool tests, and it's a very good general marker for inflammatory conditions. So it's really come to the fore in the last few years. But again, just confirming that on secretory IgA, the most abundant molecule of mucosal immunity. It's apparently IgA deficiency is the most common immune deficiency that exists in the population, but that's still 1 in 600 people. So I read the other day, but again, secretory IgA is much more likely to be low than that, in my experience with stool testing. And for me, it's one of the key markers in the chemistry markers of a stool test.
I agree. I think once it's gone, you're much more susceptible to so many things. So getting that back is one of the critical foundation steps, I think, for improving gut health. And then my other favorite child is butyrate. So at the bottom of the page, you've got the butyrate and the total short chain fatty acids, which fits in really nicely with the diversity and abundance of the microbiome generally. So a lot of those bacteria are the butyrate producing bacteria. And it gives you another indication of the health of the microbiome. And the more we know about butyrate, the more interesting it becomes, I think.
I completely agree. And again, it seems that both of our experiences have led to the same information. That's the only why we're agreeing, is because it seems to be the reality. I'm going to show the test result that I've got in later on in this webinar. And what's interesting in this particular case is this 44-year-old lady has some digestive issues and cramps from time to time. And so I'll highlight that. But what's interesting in this case is that the butyrate was actually lowest in the range of the short chain fatty acids. So I'll show you the screen. We'll look at that. So given the rest of the results were actually, inverted commas, very good. Everything was very much sort of normal biosis was there. So it's just intriguing. So again, it gives more information. So I'll pick into that and see if I can make any more discernments and distinctions with the test results. But huge fan of butyrate, and I've been using butyrate. And the pop quiz is, for those of you listening, and there are I think almost 99 of you listening into this conversation, I'd like you to, maybe with a little note, pen and paper, is you can just write down the top 10 functions of butyrate. And I think there are maybe 18 of them, but if you can name 10 of them, it's like one of those quiz games. What 10 functions of butyrate? Really, the more you know about it, the more sort of one gets excited about supporting its levels in one's body, is for sure.
Absolutely. And then lastly on the screen, pH and occult blood. So pH is, I would say, probably not a particularly interesting diagnostic marker. It does tend to correlate with, again, the overall health of the bowel. But occult blood is a very standard screening tool for unpleasant red flag conditions. So when that is positive, that is a direct referral to the doctor or the GP or a gastroenterologist for further investigation.
Yeah, yeah, acknowledged. Yeah.
So lastly, they will run, so not just relying on the PCR section for the pathogens. Doctors' data are very the problem with PCR, and it's only a small problem, is that you can't find what you're not looking for, if that makes sense. So if you haven't got the probe for something, but the sample contains the something that you don't have a probe for, then you would think it isn't there, because if you haven't got a probe, it can't ever go positive for that. So they still will run the microscopy for parasites. And you can see lists and lists and lists of protozoa and tapeworms and flukes and roundworms that will be assessed for by a human being looking down a microscope. And as part of that,
I'm sorry, I'm going to nip in here. I've had a number of clients where they said, "Oh, I've got this, I've got that," but they didn't find it. They didn't, because they'd known they've got something and they didn't find it in that particular stool test. And when they've done the doctor's data test through the microscopy, it was there. I understand there are over 40 parasites and over 30 worms that are actually analysed under the microscopy with doctor's data, which I think is the highest number of any lab running the functional tests as they are.
Indeed. So I think what's important is that if it's there, it won't be missed, because you're relying on a highly skilled technician to find out what's going on. We don't often see many of the things that are on your screen. In reality, there's only a small section of them that will probably come up relatively frequently. But it's just nice to know that it's not going to be missed if it is there. Yep. So, and then historically with stool testing, the parasitology, the microscopy section, is the thing that's had to be done over 3 days. And now doctors' data have adjusted their instructions so that if a patient or a practitioner would prefer that somebody just does a single day sample, then they can do that. That's not a problem. The instructions are designed for them to choose whether they want to do a 3-day, a 2-day, or a 1-day. Right. And there's definitely been a slight move within the industry, I think, with people thinking that patients only want to do a 1-day sample. But actually, interestingly, when we've been sending out kits, and the majority of them come back with the 3-day samples having been completed. And what it means is that with each bowel movement, the theory is that you have an increased chance of capturing that parasite. So it is very much possible for you as a clinician to ask for, or tell your patient just to do a 1-day if you think that they would, or they have mentioned that they would prefer to do a 1-day sample. But the kit is the same, so they'll be sent a 3-day one, and they can choose whether they do 1-day, 2-day, or 3-day.
Is there a difference in the price in that?
There is not a difference in the price now, okay. So it'll be a single price regardless.
Gotcha. Yeah, I certainly, it makes sense to me, and it's again, I haven't got the hindsight of 100 clients having done one stool test. Dare I say it, even compare it with themselves doing a 3-day test and seeing what differences there are. I mean, that's a cumbersome process to see. But for me, I'm wondering how I suppose is it fundamentally based on the ability, the practicality issues, perhaps, rather than the fact that it might not be always better to do 3 samples. What's your thoughts?
I think I understand why people don't want to do 3 days, and I think there's problems with people who are very constipated, for example, logistics of not wanting to do a sample when they're maybe in the office one day, and then they've got the weekend where they can do sample, let's say day 2 and day 3. There are big logistics around a 3-day test. And the relative increase in capturing a parasite over a 3-day versus a 2-day is probably quite marginal. I think I would prefer my clients to do at least a 2-day, but that's not because I'm a bully. That's just from my experience of looking at stool results, that they're not always shed evenly in every bowel movement. So they are now reporting the microscopy all in one go. They're not going to do the doctor's data used to report day 1, day 2, day 3, and they're now pooling those samples and just reporting it on one slide, if that makes sense. So from a technical point of view, it's not going to change anything, but I think I would do at least a 2-day personally.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I think maybe sort of watch this space, but I absolutely agree. It'll be 2 or 3 days for my clients in the near future, that's for sure. And so we can see how this you've got this here, and there's other markers. You've got the again, these are sort of traditionally looked for. I say traditionally looked in these functional tests.
Again, so that it's anything that the technician sees when they're looking down the microscope, they will report on. Some of these are very rare, like chocolate-laden crystals comes up very rarely. It's an inflammatory marker associated with parasitic infection. But the consistency of the stool is reported by the technician as well, and that can be very useful to understand, and particularly if you've got a patient who has an IBS, constipation and diarrhea mixed presentation, then you want to know whether they did the sample when they had a looser stool or a more constipated stool.
Yeah.
And that is the end of my section.
And although I'm actually a bit, I'm gonna move on to my screen, but I've got a question to ask you as well.
Okay.
It's to do with the viruses. I understand there's just 3. But I'm moving to my slides now, so show my screen. So we've got my screen up there now. Can you see my screen, Laura?
I can see your screen, yes.
So just got the header screen there. So there are 3 viruses in particular, which are basically the pathogenic. So these are sort of like the gut, the gastrointestinal viruses. They're also analysed in this particular test as well.
Yes.
I understand. Yeah.
They are. So they're done by PCR. So it's the adenovirus and the norovirus and things that are probably quite self-limiting. It'll be interesting again to see from our point of view, we tend not to see people when they've got a very, very acute infection of something like the norovirus. So it'll be interesting to see how often that comes up. But yeah, what I would really like to know about is the products that we can use. So
fantastic. I've got the test result there. We're going to go back to that test result, which I've got, which is the live one, is it a recent test result that I've received. So we'll focus on what I'll do is I'm going to jump straight to some of the products we're talking about.
So I'm on a daily basis going through stool results with clinicians, and they're always asking what the best products are, and I'm frequently recommending things like ADP. So what else have we got in the stable?
So I understand that for the sensitivity panels that they're going to get these natural agents that might come up for the yeast. You can see the list on your screen. And these lists, which is obviously an overlap for certain bacteria. So I'm going to focus on the antimicrobials to start with. This is the product which has been rated very high. It's very interesting to note that the leading practitioners and gastroenterologists at the Institute of Functional Medicine use this product themselves in their own clinical practice. So I learned that about 7 years ago, and it was confirmed at the recent GI APM as well in a personal conversation as well with one of the presenters who was actually in America, well, actually in Peru at the time. So ADP stands for anti-dysbiosis product. It's like acronyms. You have to know what it is before you can understand why they named it that. But it distinguishes it from other oregano supplements. Bartic's Research have an amazing facility at manufacturing their own supplements. They've also got the world-leading ability to fully emulsify their products. What that means is that the whole product, the whole of the oil, is emulsified into these small emulsified molecular size, which effectively is then being able to transport it. It doesn't require any digestion. It is simply absorbed, and it can also be transported and reach all tissues in the body. And it's particularly good for chest infections where there's mucus, where ordinary antimicrobials or indeed antibiotics may not be able to penetrate and get through to that. So ADP has been, to me, it's been a lifesaver for at least one client and many others as well. It's when I spoke to Bartic's Research 27 years ago on the phone, I spoke to the medical director, and I wanted to get a heads up as to we were just about to ask them if we could distribute their products because we had demand for it in this country. I asked Don Patterson, MD, the medical director at the time, what their leading products were, and the first product he said to me was ADP in a Texan accent. And then he reeled off 9 others, but ADP, and it's a 50 milligram guaranteed. It's their pharmaceutical grade. So Bartic's Research have above the general manufacturing GMP standards. They have pharmaceutical grade supplements, and ADP oregano. The emulsified nature of it and its sustained release makes this very different to oregano oil soft gels, which can of course be very effective for things in the upper GI tract, and they will get absorbed to some degree, but certainly not if you've got a fat digestion issue, because they're not emulsified. So it's sustained release, fully emulsified. In fact, this product has a patent for eradicating Blastocystis hominis, should that be necessary to address, and other parasites, and it's been found to be more effective than tinidazole and metronidazole, although it was taken over a longer period of time. So there have been some human studies, pilot study done on that, so that's how it achieved its patent. It is probably one of the broadest range of antibacterial, anti-yeast, and anti-parasitic supplements I'm aware of, and it has been through the human studies. So it's something that's it's a white tablet. It's very oregano smelling, but it's a tablet that releases itself in time over a sustained period of time. So it's actually good for the whole GI tract, and so it's just been a very, very effective agent. My practice would not have been the same without it. I know many practitioners say the same thing.
I agree.
The typical dosing. Yeah.
I'd also say it seems to be very well tolerated by most people, in my experience.
Yes, and because it doesn't release all of its oil like an oregano soft gel might release itself all in the stomach, and then you can have a sort of, even if you have an oregano burp, dare I say it, and actually some of the oregano gets into the esophageal tissue, which is particularly sensitive. It can be very uncomfortable, and it may be something you need to be stopping because the oil is so concentrated and so strong. But again, it's only releasing itself at a very small level in the stomach, and then as it passes through. I've had some clients who've had diarrhea where they have some of the corroded tablet come out in the loo, sorry to be graphic, and that sort of reflects that it's not all released at one time, effectively. But I've used as much as 3 at each meal for a short period of time, and typically a 6-week course would be something to address parasites that are hardy, not just a 1-week course. So ADP oregano, broad spectrum, antibacterial, anti-yeast, but not all yeasts, and certainly anti-parasitic activities. It's really my sort of go-to. It's also absolutely appropriate for small intestinal bowel overgrowth, SIBO. And as a consequence of its efficacy, and really it's only that, because let's say you and I were practitioners and we say, well, I heard that was good, we use it, didn't really have a benefit. You wouldn't be using it in many clients, but it is one of our best-selling agent supplements, and for many, many years, reflecting, I think, its efficacy. So the ADP oregano, and furthermore, whilst I'm not questioning this, in fact, it's going to be very interesting to look at the new susceptibility sheets provided by Doctors Data and this new PCR test. But I've actually found the oregano, the ADP, is actually effective when the sensitivity for the agent has been found to be moderate or even low. I've still found an efficacy on symptom outcomes and repeat testing with the ADP oregano as opposed to the oregano oil. And it may be, I think it's the sustained and emulsified nature. It sort of reaches the bugs perhaps in a different way than simple oregano. So I don't know how that works exactly, but I found it to be effective against a wider spectrum of bugs than is often indicated by the susceptibility sheet, just for our information.
Yeah, that is useful to know. And when would you do a less long course for yeast or bacterial issues than you would for parasites?
Yeah, typically I would use a higher dose, maybe 2 or even 3 with each meal with the parasites, and certainly with bacteria and yeast, because there's more die-off with yeast and certain bacteria too, perhaps less so than certain parasites. I certainly wouldn't for that reason necessarily go for such high dose, but it's typically 2 with each meal for a known sort of bacterial issue. Possibly then reducing it to 1 with each meal, and I really found that each case varies. So it will be there is no, although I said 6 weeks, I found that most people who take 6 weeks high dose, then maybe they might need for 4 weeks at a lower dose before I'd ever then consider stopping it. And if the client wants a repeat test, wait 2 weeks away from it and then consider a repeat test on that particular aspect of the test, i.e. parasites. So typically, yes. 1 or 2 for bacterial and yeast infections as well. Yeah. The good news with the ADP is that it's emulsified. And like I said, it's very good for chest infections as well. It's actually very good for systemic infections too, which may, of course, not come up in the stool test. So just for other aspects of health, ADP is a very good anti-infective agent systemically.
When you're not in norm biosis.
Yes, exactly. When maybe you've got the stool test wasn't used, but someone's ill and they want to protect themselves against certainly chest infections. I find very, very effective. Persistent chest infections, I find this is a very effective remedy. So I'm going to move on through, and I also refer back to, I'm going to come back to the actual stool test result as well. So there's a new product called caprylic acid complex, and it contains caprylic acid, which is a well-documented sort of medium-chain fatty acid, I think, and it's effectively a broad-spectrum antibacterial, not just an anti-yeast, but antibacterial. But it's also anti-worms and anti-parasites and antiviral. This particular formula. So what allergy research have done is they've added to caprylic acid the well-known pau d'arco bark extract, also the black walnut, which is particularly well known as being an anti-worm and anti-parasitic agent, along with some oregano oil powder, and they've added some biotin. There are some studies, and it's controversial, I acknowledge, which may indicate that biotin can inhibit the conversion of the candida to its mycelial form. But again, I said that's controversial. 1 or 2 studies have shown that, and then actually other studies have not shown it. But biotin is one of the oldest nutrients, interesting, on the planet. It's actually this one, it's D-biotin. It's estimated to be one of the oldest nutrients on the planet Earth, just for our interest's sake. It's only bio, as in life, biobiotin. So that's why that's been added in there, just in case effectively it can have that impact on inhibiting yeast. So it's primarily there as an anti-yeast formula, but also, and for me, because I'm particularly keen on inhibiting viral burdens in folk, it also has, the pau d'arco has antiviral effects too. The black walnut effectively is there for the parasites and the worms, and the oregano oil, again, broad spectrum. We've covered that already. So this is an exciting addition. I'd like to give as few supplements as possible to any client for all reasons, effectively. And whilst the ADP is truly fantastic in terms of its efficacy, this caprylic acid complex gives us something to have. Not quite a one-stop shop, but it's actually, and I haven't got that much experience because it is a new product for us, but it is something that someone can consider alongside the ADP or alongside any of the other products that I'll now show you as well. So it's the typical dose will be less, and some people find it easier to swallow capsules versus tablets, so it's also a potential factor to consider on the practicality if someone's going to take something for a number of weeks. The next, sorry, Laura, I'm then just moving on. Did you have any questions on that one?
No, it looks really interesting. I didn't know about it, so I'm.
No, it is new, so you're sort of like, you're here first. For years, I've used Caprin, which is the name for the caprylic acid supplement from Bartics Research. It also supplies a useful dose of calcium and magnesium as well, interestingly. And again, it's broad spectrum antibacterial. Most of us know it as an anti-yeast agent or an antifungal agent, but it was also very useful at inhibiting a wide array of bacteria as well. So I've used the ADP with Caprin. But effectively, I wanted to effectively have an impact on the widest array of negative bacteria, effectively unwanted bacteria as possible. So I have used them both together. There can be some die-off with more yeast with Caprin, so typically I would use sort of one with each meal or one with 2 or 3 meals and maybe consider building it up. Whereas in fact, with the ADP, the recommendation and the clinical experience is you start with the high dose. So this is sort of contrary to what some people might think and might have been trained to do. ADP, I'm moving with 6 or 9 a day to have the biggest effect as quickly as possible. Whereas with Caprin, particularly because of the die-off with yeast, I would typically start with a lower dose. We start with 1, then go to 1 at breakfast, 1 at dinner, and then carry on with that for a period of time, maybe increase to 1 each meal, and then maybe increase to 2 at breakfast, 2 at dinner. So just thought I'd share with you my experience of using these to minimize sort of die-off response. But you want to move in with the antiparasitic and the antibacterial agent for the oregano at a high dose where possible and not build it up. So I thought I'd share that insight.
Yeah, great.
And then we have something which has been a lot in the literature, and therefore the sort of scientific nutritional news is the wide array of benefits of berberine. And it's sort of what system does it not benefit? But the berberine is an antimicrobial, so it's antibacterial and anti-yeast, but it also has other benefits which have been documented. So it's one of these, and perhaps my story about the ADP oregano at the high dose for 5 years that is that the oregano oil, so slightly going back to the ADP, has the carvacrol has a powerful anti-inflammatory effect. And this individual has had an inflammatory bowel condition as well as celiac. And it may well be that it's delivering an anti-inflammatory effect alongside the antimicrobial effect. And this is, I think, the beauty of natural medicine, is that in nature, certain molecules have a sort of pleiotropic, or at least a multifactorial role to play in our health. And therefore there can be, not rather than a side effect, you actually get a side benefit, you get another effect, which is beneficial as well. And berberine it falls into that category as well. It's something that supports cholesterol levels, supports bile, it supports cardiovascular health. It's effectively good for the gut and the liver and the cardiovascular system. And so there's quite a lot of literature being written about this particular extract. So berberine 500. And again, I would use relatively low dosing. So 1 capsule with up to 3 meals a day, breakfast and dinner, or 1 with each meal. And that's what I use for berberine. You could use berberine with the ADP. You could use the berberine with the caproic acid complex. You could use the berberine with caprin. So I found often the more complex conversation, and sometimes I've had notes from webinar attendees saying, it's the combinations, Anthony, that I really wanted to know about as much as the individual products. How do we put things together? And so I think logically we'd say we wouldn't use caprin with caproic acid complex. And in fact, I might move from the caprin, to the caproic acid complex. However, bearing that in mind is that if I found an individual with a multiple array of unwanted bugs, so it's yeast, a bacteria, and a parasite, and a virus, I would go for caproic acid complex for sure. Sometimes, however, if there's an issue with biotransformation or detox issues, I might want to start on the caprin and just gently move in and inhibit the yeast and bacteria, and then move on to the caproic acid complex. Again, what we're doing, Laura, is we're treating the individual with what they've got rather than the bugs within them. So some individuals may be very robust and can handle an antimicrobial dose that's high, and some may not. So that's really for us clinically to decide. So we've got 4 products there. So I've actually, from all the products we have available, I'm just going to flip back through the slides without getting seasick, as it were. So we've got the ADP Oregano, broad spectrum, as a single agent, supremely beneficial, one of our best-selling products for the last 25 years, and justifiably so. It's changed many individuals' lives and indeed practices, because when you get a beneficial outcome, that individual may be inclined to make referrals to you. So for me, it's a win for all the clients who do well, and also supports one's own business. I'm a big fan of referrals rather than marketing per se.
Agreed.
And the caproic acid complex, this is new, so not a lot of experience, but they've done a very wise thing here in terms of addressing. In fact, I don't know of a single other product that addresses the yeast, the bacteria, the worms, the parasites, and viruses in one.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to trying that. It's going to be great.
And then the caprin itself, again, is something I've got a lot more experience with. And again, it may well be that I will use less of it. Certainly, it seems like I will possibly by using the caproic acid complex, but there's still a place for it, particularly with sensitive folk, to use one and then build up slowly before you go on to more broad spectrum formula. So that's a thought. And you can use the caprin with the ADP, you can use the caprin with the berberine, you can use the berberine with the ADP. So really, I've chosen 4 products, and you can interchangeably sort of use them. And really, the caproic acid products, 2 of them obviously, but you could use berberine and ADP. You could even consider berberine, caprin, and ADP. It is likely, but I haven't met a case yet that I've used them per se. So I've usually used 2 rather than 3. So those are the antimicrobials. And I've got some information on some probiotics.
Yes.
Live bacteria, and we've got the most commonly, it's actually the most studied probiotic substance on earth of any strain whatsoever, of any type of genus, that's Saccharomyces boulardii, which literally means yeast of Boulard. For those of us who studied Latin at school, the double I on the end is the genitive case. So Dr. Henri Boulard in Malaysia discovered on light cheese this Saccharomyces boulardii, and it's 9 billion colonizing fecal units. And it's typically an anti-diarrhea agent. It inhibits the toxins of Clostridium difficile, A and B. So it's been proven to be effective for traveler's diarrhea, TD. So really, anyone who's got diarrhea, S. boulardii. But S. boulardii, interestingly and fascinatingly, it's the most profound way of supporting secretory IgA of any probiotic known. And maybe all the audience know this. So this is revision. But it really is, if you've got low secretory IgA, you want to raise secretory IgA, which may be normal, but you want to raise it because there are the presence of unwanted bugs, then the S. boulardii is the prime choice. Being a yeast, it's also perfect to use with antibiotics. Yeah. Take one with every antibiotic. It protects to some degree. It can't protect entirely, but it protects against the antibiotics use. It also supports a wide array of existing commensal bacteria. So it's protective of other strains of probiotics, which I think is a fantastic, and that's why we've all heard of S. boulardii. Many thanks to Michael Ash's sort of discovery of it through his mucosal immune journey, and then identifying it. And then every other company started to make it after he encouraged allergy research to make one effectively. So S. boulardii, one of the most common supplements I've ever used.
Yeah, And then, people often ask whether it's worth using when someone has a candida or yeast overgrowth specifically as an agent, as opposed to using an antifungal agent. Have you found that to be effective ever?
You know, it's interesting you said that, because in France, where it comes from, it's referred to as yeast versus yeast in French. It's actually yeast versus yeast. So it's actually a yeast that inhibits candida. It does inhibit candida and other yeast. Actually, it inhibits all unwanted bugs, but because it's a yeast, it does inhibit yeast. And again, it may be for many individuals who have a chronic yeast issue or candidiasis, or maybe have systemic candida as well. If you move in with an anti-yeast agent like caprin, there might be some unpleasant die-off, and it's too harsh. So maybe it's a perfect place to start with the more sensitive folk in terms of their detoxification capacity. Start off with Esbiladi before you move in with caprin. Of course, you wouldn't take Esbiladi at the same time of day as caprin or ADP or berberine or the cupric acid complex. You'd actually take it 2 hours away. So just to make that clear. And you can indeed do that. So actually, with some individuals, you can actually take the Esbiladi and the caprin together. But certainly, you could start off with the yeast issue by taking Esbiladi for sure.
And do you ask people to take their Esbiladi or their probiotics at night ever, or so that they're further away? Is there any data on that?
You know, I don't know the data. I have a lot of clinical experience, but I haven't found, I've seen, I think there are hundreds of studies on Esbiladi, but I haven't seen one which identifies, I haven't seen one, there may well be, that identifies the exact time of day that's best to take this. I found it effective with food, and I've also, I haven't really recommended it a lot at night. So I'm limited in my experience, even though I've used it as much as any other practitioner in the UK, I imagine, because I've been using it since we first had it over 25 years ago. But it's something that I've often used with food, but certainly at least 2 hours away from antimicrobials. And if I'm using the ADP, and I'm not using it with each meal, I might say, well, okay, ADP at breakfast and lunch, but take the Esbiladi at dinner, maybe at bedtime as well, but not mostly with food, in fact, Laura.
Okay, great.
And then I'm going to move through it. So now we all know it's becoming more and more strain specific. So this, when we're faced with these details, these letters, these acronyms and numbers, you think, oh my goodness me. But these are the specific strains that get studied, where professional PhD microbiologists get paid a salary for 6 months to produce evidence for the benefits of this particular strain versus another. And that's why all the probiotics, or most of them now in the future, certainly, will all have specific strains which have been sort of evidenced on the research. So this is the complete one. This contains the 12 strains of probiotic bacteria that have been found to be effective for a wide array of different benefits and functions. And it's the 50 billion per capsule, so maybe 1 or 2. So it's really the complete. I'm not saying that everyone needs this one. And again, this is the unknown. So things are unknown, and there's so much we don't know. But I found that this is the complete. And it'll be something that I would use after the antimicrobial process. Now, I'm aware of time. I'm actually going to just move through a bit quicker here. I want to show you the screen as well. I know some of our lovely attendees are going to be leaving as well. So we've got the women's strains. So we've got at least 4 of these strains have been found to be specific for the vaginal flora. So taking it orally can support that. So it's 10 strains with 4 particularly associated with the Gasseri and the root area, the crispatus, have been found to be specifically abundant for healthy vaginal flora, as you may well know.
Yeah, great.
And then we have Biodos 7+ without the specific strain names, but 20 billion per capsule. I've used this for 15 years effectively. 1 or 2 with 1 or 2 meals a day. So it'd be one or the other. And I have found something that I learned very early on from a Townsend Letter review of probiotics. And it was a fantastic thing to have read. I didn't read everything that came out in the Townsend Letters, but one article, when do you use and how do you use probiotics, from an expert in the field. It wasn't Andrew Weil, but it was someone who knew him. And he described that start with 1 strain, which could be Esbiladi, and then go with maybe a 3 strain, and I might consider Lactobacillus plantarum rhamnosus salivarius. We call it PRS. So you've got 3 strains. Start with 1 strain, then 3 strain, then multi-strain, and then consider rotation. And that just learning that principle, as opposed to having to select the perfect one for each client, has stood me in good stead. So I typically start with the fewer strains, and then move on to maybe 3, so a small number of multiple strains, and then a wider array. the logic for that I can't fully explain, and I haven't got the time to go into right now, but it's just something that I've found to be a very effective point of principle in terms of how do we use probiotics. So it's really sharing with you a very wise man, even 30 years ago, who was involved in probiotics, writing the Townsend letter. I adopted that as a point of principle and then found no real reason to change since then.
Okay, great. And then do you find the FOS or the inulin and the arabinogalactans in here to be well tolerated?
You know, very good point. In fact, this is partly why I would use it after the antimicrobials and not with. Now, I've had a real issue when FOS and inulin came out in early 1990s, mid 94, 95. I remember vividly recommending FOS to a client, and they'd never been more bloated. So I tried it. I was more bloated than ever before I'd ever been, and so I stopped the FOS right away, and I've been wary of it ever since. So it's fortunate I discovered that very early on. I'm very wary of too much probiotic when we don't know what's going on inside the gut more. So I would use these strains with more of the prebiotic later on, i.e. phase 2 or phase 3, and I would certainly use the Espeladi and the antimicrobials first. So otherwise, then they are well tolerated and I haven't had a problem. So, but I've usually used it in that point of principle: antimicrobials, and then these. So to answer that question. Now, digestive enzymes. I'm going to move through, so I appreciate some of us may have to leave. We're going to carry on for a bit longer. There are two forms of digestive enzyme that I'm going to share with you. One is a vegetarian, fully vegan capsules, etc., vegetarian capsules, and it's a full spectrum digest, and it's just that. The naturopath at Allergy Research asked the companies, can we please have the widest array of enzymes that contain the endo and exopeptidase blend? Now that's complicated words, but basically it's the protease that lop off the end bits of the amino acid sequence as well as the mid bits of the amino acid protein sequence to break it down. And it's designed, basically it breaks down gluten molecules, it breaks down casein, it breaks down soy protein. So it actually breaks down the most common allergenic antigen containing protein foods. Something that I found to be really effective is vegetarian. And what's interesting with the vegetarian, I haven't found it to be useful in all cases because many individuals, like I was saying earlier, have an issue with their digestion, with their elastase issues being an issue, or they have pancreatic needs. And my assertion is that many more individuals have pancreatic needs than we know. And so if we take that lesson away today, amongst other things to do with this test, then that will be a lesson well learned, in my opinion. Agreed. Pancreas needs help. So when individuals need pancreatic help, maybe they'll need this one, which is the closest to human enzyme production, the closest to human tissue, pancreas, from the pig. So if you're a vegetarian, you would take it. Or if you're Muslim, you wouldn't take it from a pig. But I found the glandular material in the pancreas pork formula actually supports the pancreatic gland as well as helping digestion. Whereas the full spectrum digest is a vegetarian. It helps to break down the widest array of foods and carbohydrates as well. This one works in a wider pH spectrum, Laura, because the pancreatic enzymes through the bicarbonate, they'll work in a higher pH. But if the bile isn't flowing properly, many individuals have that bile issue, and pH is not ideal for the pancreatic enzymes to be activated in the best way, then I would consider the full spectrum digest. So how do we assess that? It's a good question. And you might have evidence of that in the pH marker, you may have it in the elastase marker, you may have it in the signs and symptoms. So it's not always easy to determine. And sometimes you might find a rotation of the full spectrum digest with the pancreas is actually a way to go in the beginning before you get to be more acutely aware of how to assess that. But if someone had a low butyrate and they therefore had their pH was a bit too high because they weren't producing enough short chain fatty acids, then maybe they'll need this over and above the pork pancreas, which I found to be the most effective overall digestive agent.
Can you give both together?
You know, it's a good thought. You know, in fact, it's funny, I get asked questions like this, like, you could use them together. I haven't yet. So, but you could take one with lunch and one with dinner. So, or you could take one of each possibly for challenging digestive issues. So very interesting question. So just thought I'd share some, because it's so complicated, and Nick Gonzalez used this particular formula for his cancer treatment using 127 a day of his, and he did a test with all the products on the market and found this one was the most effective, which is why we got to know Nick Gonzalez, because he worked with Allergy Research products. God rest his soul. So pancreas support I found very good for supporting the pancreas. But some individuals who are vegetarian or may have a pH issue, so low stomach acid or lack of short chain fatty acids, or it's the beginning of the program when their gut's not working so well, full spectrum digest. Only take it with food. Don't take it on an empty stomach. So a lot of enzymes can be taken away from food for one reason or another, or you can take it, okay, I missed it, half an hour later, I'll take it. Only take it with a meal is my strong recommendation. It's a strong enzyme. Only take it with food. So we've got the two, what I found to be the most effective digestive aids of the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 that I'm familiar with. And then lastly, we've got some information on intestinal healing, but what I do is, because of timing, I've got 3 products to do with healing up butyrate there as well. Huge fan of butyrate. It does pong, it does smell, and it's the natural smell. It's, I'm sorry to be crude, folk, but the if everyone's been sick and you've got that sort of slightly acrid smell, the acridity is actually butyric acid often, and so the capsules can smell. So we want to keep them in a cool, dry place, maybe even the fridge. Do not put the supplement, the butyrate, in your pill pack for the day, because it will pong out, it will smell out all your pills if you've got them in a little tray. So you want to keep that in its own pot, and do not put your nose to it. And only take it with food. So you got food in, just because it does have a strong odor. But if it's butyrate, I'm a huge fan of butyrate, like you are, Laura, and there's good reason for it. And so lots of benefits. So I'm not going to give you a list of 10 benefits of butyrate, but neutralizing ammonia, helping bile flow, being the best colonic fuel. That's 3 of them, and there are at least 7 more, if not 13 more.
Gut brain.
Gut brain connection. We can go on. It's like generation game. We can keep on remembering. So what I'd like to do is, as we end this, and again, thank you so much everyone for your attention. And I know there's so much information to cover. I'm going to show you that this I got result just over a week ago, and this 44-year-old lady has gut issues, and I'm just actually going to go to the top of it. It's a bit of a don't get seasick by going up watching the screen too closely. And here we have this nice spidergram. We can see it's not bad. It fills out the green area, but there's a little bit of a lack of actinobacteria and the bacteroidetes. And it's got a DI score, dysbiosis score of 3, and 1 or 2 would be better. So that's interesting in itself. So nice display of the slight lack of normal biosis. Key findings, only 2. This individual has regular discomfort and cramps in the gut, but not all the time. Take the personal details away, and we can see the actinobacteria. You can see the yellow triangle there is a little bit low. It's reflected on the spidergram. Otherwise, look where the green triangles are. Look where the scores are. It's all in the green range. So pretty good result. I'm going to go through quite swiftly, like a little movie. And we see that the Eubacterium cereum, which I'm unfamiliar with. That's borderline. Otherwise, all the other markers, they're nicely in the green. Now, yes, salivarius, the Streptococcus salivarius, is a little bit low, but that's an individual. But across the board, pretty good findings compared to lots of stool tests that I have seen. And again, the proteobacteria and the others, they're all nicely in the green in the reference range. And I move on down here, and we can see the viruses that you referred to, the pathogenic bacteria, including Campylobacter, they're all negative. The parasites, negative. So it's not that's what's going on in the gut causing this discomfort. Protozoa, all negative, as you might expect. Tapeworms and flukes, all nicely normal. And then we have a moderate yeast, but not under culture. Or is it no? Forgive me. It's the parasitology microscopy. So no worm, moderate yeast. So that's really one of the imbalances that we found. But under the no other marker, the yeast under the next test, the parasitology information. Sorry, we're going a bit fast there. The pathogenic bacteria, none. Imbalanced bacteria, which I find very common, the alpha and gamma hemolytic strep, no big deal. But no yeast isolated in the culture. So although it was indicated in the microscopy, nothing was indicated in the culture, which is a positive sign. And then we look at the elastase, again 244. Remember what I said? Digestion. I want that to be higher. So in this individual, actually it's remarkably clear on the bacterial front. A little bit of yeast possibly, but that doesn't explain the symptoms. And I don't really believe it's a big issue. But lack of digestion is a possibility. So we've got lack of pancreatic enzymes. And then we've got the calprotectin is wonderfully low. In terms of inflammation, I mean, the discomfort is a significant pain, but it's not to do with inflammatory bowel issues at all, or immune activity. Secretory IgA is less than ideal. We can see it's 70.6 on the screen here. I like it to be, closer to, 150 at least, so double what it is. And also it highlights the fact that it's borderline low, you could say. It tells me there's not an immune battle going on with some bug or other. And when there is that fight going on, often the secretory IgA levels can be above 400 or 500. And then here we have a butyrate, as I referred to earlier on in this webinar. The butyrate is the lowest of all the short-chain fatty acids,
Just
percentage-wise,
scraping
no.
in. Yeah, scraping in within the normal reference range, but only just.
Yeah, and the total short-chain fatty acids are right at the bottom of the reference range. So suggesting that this individual eats a vegetarian diet, enough carbohydrate, has the prebiotics. So for me, it's really interesting. Elastase, maybe the elastase, the lack of digestion, potentially breaking down the carbohydrates and making available those foods for the fermentation of the bacteria has led to a slightly low butyrate, leading to a slight lack of protection. And there is, what we've got is that there's some other issue going on. It might likely to be a bile conjugate issue that's leading to the cramping, as opposed to something in the gut. So actually, with this test, it's been the first one that I've seen of the GI360, maybe a differential diagnosis for something else, but also it's alerted me to some important things overall: the potential need for digestive support, secretory IgA support, and the butyrate, and those three might be connected as well. So I found it, really, really interesting to look at that and see a live result. Again, folding it in to the patient's case history.
And some of the lack of diversity is in the Firmicutes family, which is one of the biggest filer for producing the short chain fatty acids. So that's interesting. But it's interesting that she's vegetarian, because I'm assuming therefore.
No, not vegetarian. No, not quite vegetarian, but eats lots of vegetable sources of food, a diverse array of vegetables.
Yeah. So as you say, maybe it's from the digestive capacity.
Yeah. So we're sort of a differential diagnosis in this particular instance, as saying, it's this particular bug, take ADP, for example.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be useful just to show that. I appreciate that we may have we've gone over. I really appreciate your time, Laura, and in preparing what you prepared, but also to all of us listening in. And thank you so much for joining in. It's something we could have had a conversation with, I suspect, now for at least maybe dare I say another hour. But appreciate your time is very precious. So thank you so much for staying with us. I know some of you've had to leave. But we've got, so really, I just thought it'd be nice to actually see an actual live result. And what's interesting, it didn't come up with they found this bug and they took this they took capric acid complex or ADP and it worked, but it's actually showing me something that it's not this, and therefore it's got me considering something else, which again is part of the value of tests and wasn't necessarily what we expected.
Absolutely.
So, Laura, I'm going to go back to my slides, but perhaps I'd like to, again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I would really like to just sort of leave you to sort of give a quick summary review of this GI360, and I've got my slides on the screen for you as a sort of prompter.
Okay.
Why would we want to choose GI360? Just to wrap up.
So from my point of view, it's now at the top of the pyramid for all the stool tests on the market, because it's combining the strengths of all the technologies that we have. So so from my point of view, that's the best part of it. So the PCR, the robustness of all the studies behind the PCR technology, the use of the microscopy that is old school but standard, gold standard, international standards, and the culture for the bacteria and the yeast, which allows us to use much more targeted products for our interventions in clinical practice.
That was brilliant. For those of you, I think we will get a playback on that. But I think we'll get access to the webinar for those of you who've been here. Let's do it again. And then there's some more summary benefits that I've summarised for the again, state of the art. So thank you, Doctor's Data. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank all of you for tuning in. I'm hoping this will be the start of we'll do a number of these collaborative webinars so we can actually drill down into some tests and maybe even have a review on this particular test when we've got some 6 months or a year's experience. We can revisit and we can actually drill down and have a follow-up that could be useful for someone fresh to the webinar as well as those individuals attending today as a consideration. Do you take questions yourself with Regeneris on this test? So I wonder if anyone watching, listening, so they can actually email into the Regeneris email and they can ask you questions about the test. And if they want to ask questions of any of the products, then of course, please email me. And I'm going to, my email is I'm wondering what the best email is. I might just see if I can type it on the screen as we're looking at it so that it's clear. So just so I don't have to read it out. So Anthony@Nutri-Link.co.uk. Send me questions on products, send Laura questions on the test, but hopefully that's been a great starter for us to engage in the most advanced stool test in the world, GI360.
Great.
And then we say farewell. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Till next time, and we're closing the webinar now. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.